Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Watches with Dennis. Here with the Saturday live stream, decided to go with what we're going to call evergreen, one of these evergreen topics where I don't just talk about new watches that came out, but instead want to talk about the idea of watch collecting and the superficiality of certain collections, or whether that can even truly exist, or if it does exist, if we should even ever really talk about it. But I think it's worth talking about. So obviously, that answer is really clear from the get-go. So anyway, in terms of housekeeping items, want to go ahead and denote I did finally get a little bit after the last live stream the Glasuta Reynal review up for the 60s. I'm wearing the 60s actually today on the wrist, just because it'd been about a week since I wore it. So that got posted for 99-cent club members on, I think I got it up Saturday night, and then late Sunday it went live for everyone else. So anyway, if you're interested in a review on that, you can take a look. They have a lot of different versions of this watch, but they're all like the same size. So, but there are a few different features like small seconds and stuff. But I think in terms of wearability, if you've seen 160s, you've seen them all essentially, other than weight, depending on what material they use to make them. So had that, and then I haven't really had any new content since then. Been pretty busy working, and so the motivation for this was actually driven by, and I have a link in the show notes to an article that I heard about on the BlogToWatch weekly podcast, but I hadn't read it. I'd actually overlooked it over at A BlogToWatch, and it's one that Mike Razak, I hope I said his last name right, wrote, and it's called "Wait a Minute, I've Discovered the Worst Kind of Collector," which is the best clickbait title for an article I've seen in quite a while, and click I did. And so it goes along and it explores this idea of a superficial watch collector, or I should say a superficial collection established by someone who purports to be a watch collector. And I thought it was really interesting. But setting aside the article itself, which you of course can go and read, and you'll see on the screen right here, what's more interesting is actually the comment section, because it is massive and it is all over the place. You see 132 comments, which I don't know what their average comment load is on a BlogToWatch, but I don't think it's typically this many. And it's all over the place, from people saying they totally agree with this argument to others who are saying that it's elitist to to criticize and call out other people's style of collecting. And so the only thing superficial was the article itself. It's like all over the place. So with people saying, you're sucking the fun out of the hobby when you start saying certain things are superficial, or certain approaches. He was very careful about he wasn't saying the watches were superficial, but you see the example up here in the headline, which is a Rolex Daytona, which of course comes up quite a bit when we start talking about watch collecting, and sort of runs through the gamut of all of that. So I thought it would be interesting for us, those of you who are able to watch live, or of course, if you're watching the recording, you can always comment what you think on this topic, and I go back and read those. But the idea of, should we be saying certain types of collections are superficial, and if so, what do we think of that notion? And I've struggled a bit with it, in the sense that I see it both ways. But let me go ahead and greet the chat really quickly. There's a couple. I see Pocket Watch Time posted this just before it went live, saying, "Let's go." I don't know if he said it exactly like that, but the go does emphasize quite a bit, along with a variety of cornucopia of fruit explode. Oh, I guess those are actually party favors. I thought those were fruits exploding out of the Thanksgiving cornucopia, but they are very small on my screen. And Kevin says, "It's raining here in Lakeland, Florida right now." Well, hopefully you stay dry. It is, as I look out my window, cloudy outside, but I'm not sure we're anticipating rain today, though heat finally broke. And I was actually able to walk to work for once. I live about, 2 miles away from work, so it's about a 30-minute walk when I can do it, and I like to do it. But of course, weather is a major factor on this. And Patrick with Pocket Watch Time gives me the perfect segue to get into the topic. I completely agree with the article. 99% of YouTube channels are just sellers and flippers who say they like watches but are just chasing cash. That's why I like Dennis, because Dennis doesn't have any cash, because he spent it all on watches that then just depreciate, I think was the rest of the statement. I couldn't read it past the little smiley face, but yes, no, I mean, obviously there are a lot of people that that do make money on YouTube, in particular by selling stuff. They're selling watches in a lot of cases. It's probably the most egregious scenario, I would agree, in terms of where the conflict can come into play. Obviously, others do things more tangentially, like selling straps, or I mean, even this channel, while I don't sell watch stuff, I have shirts, so there's that, but I guess that's all channel branded sort of things. But hey, I did exploit that Adama P. Gay Dead Girl in a Lawn Chair ad campaign for my own nefarious profit-making purposes. I probably made a whole $15 on shirts that I sold with that. So, there is a path. There is even a path on the gravel road to a future. Not a profitable path, but a path nonetheless. So I agree with the article broadly as well, but I sympathize with the argument about saying that in a way does dive into an elitist manner, like going around and so I've had people comment on this channel from time to time, especially on the live streams where I get more snarky than my polished content. My polished content's usually I've done some more controversial, I guess, topics, but by and large, it's a little more, refined because I edit it. So, and this is more stream of conscious and interacting with the chat, but especially on when I talk about new releases, and I'm just giving my first thoughts. I do get comments from time to time that one, don't like my take, which is expected and fine, and others that on occasion have said, I don't like that you say anything negative ever. Unsubscribed. If they were subscribed, a lot of them probably weren't, but they like to say that, so they let you know. And it's interesting because it's a very different philosophy. Obviously, I don't see anything wrong with saying something negative about a watch, but there are other people that the hobby, and this is probably true for all sorts of hobbies, it's such an escape for people to get away from the real world, get away from politics, get away from their money problems, getting away from their family problems, getting away from their work problems, that they want it to be a bubble of positivity. And so criticism, warranted or not, bursts that bubble and it makes them very uncomfortable. This article over with A BlogToWatch, I think for some people does that because you're taking a person and how they assembled the collection is getting judged. And that's very off-putting because I think they then imagine, well, what if my collection was judged? Or some of them are a little more basic about it, quite frankly, and they'll be like, oh, look, he criticized people getting a Santos, so I own a Santos, and thus he is saying that I am a superficial watch collector, which, again, that's not what the article said, but people don't always read all that well. You'll find, obviously, with any hobby that people and their skill sets within the ability to understand, especially nuance, really vary quite a bit. But I do sympathize with the notion broadly of attacking a collection because it's like, well, don't you want there to be more collectors? So how they put it together, does it really matter? And they're right, it doesn't really matter. But we are making judgments every single day. My favorite example that I like to do is with movies, because this same thing about watches and positivity I've seen for years in pinball, in my pinball collecting journey and my pinball content creation. There are a lot of people, they won't criticize you criticizing a game, but they will say any pinball is good pinball. That's it's a mantra. Any pinball is good pinball. I'm just happy to play. Would you ever say that about a movie, though? Would you ever honestly say that new War of the Worlds with Ice Cube, like, it deserves to exist? It doesn't deserve to exist. It doesn't. And there are pinball machines that deserve to be pushed off a roof and destroyed. They are that bad. But people feel like that they have to defend the hobby, and that's how they do it. I think that's kind of how it comes about with watch collecting to a degree as well. It's just sort of everyone needs to feel like the way they're doing it is great, because we don't want to alienate folks, and you don't want to gatekeep. So I will always open with, regardless of what I think of your collecting style, your money, your choice, do what you want. But I also feel like this article that one should be able to express the opinion that way is stupid. So that's kind of my broad take on it. But I do see why it does alienate some people. And, it's a hobby. People are going to have emotions with it. And so for some, it's frivolous and fun, and they don't want to overthink it too much. Totally get it. Totally get it. But I do think that it makes it interesting. And I thought, so for me, what I tried to do is an intellectual exercise. You can probably see my tabs up at the top. Well, we're going to start jumping into some stuff where I would go where I think the article was trying to go. But I'm going to be a little more particular in terms of options that are being presented. Patrick followed up with his prior comment with, I don't mean the sellers. I just mean all the Rolex buyers who never keep a watch for more than a month or two. Yeah, no, that makes, yeah, I get that. Yeah, yeah, they get it, and then they make their content and they flip it. Yeah, I totally understand. Ristful Ignorance, welcome to the live stream. MCart, welcome as well. I would mind to be superficial, and I have 3 watch collections: Seiko Diver, Moonwatch, and the Sub. You can call it what you want, but there's nothing wrong with that. Oh, you mean he wouldn't mind? And there's there are a lot of watch snobs. Yes, there are. Ice Cube shame. I'm unsubscribing. In my defense, your defense, well, not in my defense, because it's going to make me look bad. I haven't seen that War of the Worlds. I thought I should so that I could truly criticize it, but I have not. That said, Ice Cube has done a lot of really good movies. So when I heard that this one was terrible, I was very sad. So I'm trying to think what my favorite Ice Cube movie is, but it's nothing. I guess he was in that sequel to Triple X when they didn't get Vin Diesel, right? That was okay. That one was okay. Yeah, no, snobbery is definitely a thing. But part of the article that this goes into is the idea of people picking particular watches, and they're picking them not because they love the watch, but rather what the watch tells other people about them. Now, again, everything we choose tells people about something. Like, if you go and you wear a Kansas City Chiefs t-shirt, you're saying something to people. You're doing it on purpose, by the way. It is deliberate. So, like, people acting like they don't care what other people think, they might not care if other people disagree, but they're still trying to project something when they wear particular things. I am right there, though, with MCart, in the sense, like, some of this stuff, like, he listed Seiko Diver, which I've had one before. I don't currently have one. A Moonwatch. I'm not a big fan of the Moonwatch personally, but the Submariner, I really like the Submariner. And it is a basic, like baby's first luxury watch picks. That's probably going to be in there, right? It's that popular. But that was the thing. And the article does explain that, is these choices that people end up with aren't bad watches in any way. They're popular for a reason. But that's when we start getting into hype and overhype and all of that. And it's a question of how you build out the collection, and what maybe it projects something, whether you mean it to or not, or whether that was your motivation or not. And we know about this constantly, right? There are lots of collectors who, if they see someone with a bunch of Rolexes, don't like that there are a bunch of Rolexes. And why is that the case? You're making an assumption. Either you're making an assumption about the personality of the person, or you're making an assumption that they're too scared to really collect. And so they're only getting things so that they'll never take a huge bath if they ever have to get out of the hobby, so that feels non-committal. Or if it's just happening like to see 1 or 2 watches, you might think they're not really, I don't know that they're a real watch collector, because Rolex is so popular broadly. It doesn't say you're a collector. So I don't know if I can even engage them in a conversation, because they might not actually know anything about watches. So there's those sort of things that I think factor a little bit into it. Ristful says, unless it's a consented roast per se, I don't agree with bashing someone's collection. Yes, I think that's a very fair point. And again, in the case of the article we are discussing, none of the watches were criticized, and only it was how you got to those watches that was where issue was. But again, we're slicing the onion, right? At what layer did it go too far? At that layer will be different for all of us. Ben says, good morning, everyone. What's on your wrist? I'm wearing the Glasuta Original 60s. He's wearing a Rolex Yachtmaster. Feeling great today. I've never even handled a Yachtmaster. Koji says, 3 Kings. 3 Kings. And thank you for being a 99 Set Club member, by the way, Koji. Ristful says, even if I really like a watch, I believe they should try to find negatives no matter how small. I've never run into a perfect watch. Even my most favorite watch in my collection has a number of flaws with it. But I might also just be judging way too harshly. I don't know. Ben 10 says, I collect watches and don't tend to sell. Three Kings were quite good. Yes, the movie. I've heard good things. I've not actually seen it, so I cannot comment. Ristful says, big baller, Ben 10. Patrick says, I'm wearing the Zen U50 Pro today. Ben says, critiques require being critical, so negativity can be useful. And let's see. Matthew says, saw your latest video, Patrick. Hope you finally get your sub. I reached back out. What about my sub? I reached back out to our AD. They invited me to a tutor event, and then they told me the wrong day. And I didn't go that day. And then the day they told me I couldn't go. So they did correct it before the date hit. But it was just like one of those things. Because I wanted to check out that red dial burgundy tutor still. So they had remembered that I had asked about that. Ben says, yeah, Rolex is so common. I rarely wear mine nowadays, except for today. Yes. Ben says, Dennis, you have the Geo60s chrono? No, I do not. No, mine is just it's the rose gold Geo60s time only with center seconds. It is back when it was still in the Senators line, not the vintage line that it is now. Patrick says, I love watches. I'm always critical. If you can't explain why you bought or like a watch, I'll roast you. I do like Patrick's content. That is why I'm subscribed to it. Jonathan says, no offense to anyone, but by the unnecessary nature of watch collecting, I would argue, yes, it's superficial, but there's generally nothing wrong with that. And I would agree, Jonathan. All of it on a level, I mean, yes, it's all superficial in a way. And so, yeah, again, how we choose to slice the apple or not slice the apple is, completely at our own discretion. So let's go ahead and slice some apples. So I started thinking about this, and I used AI because why the sky, we got to turn, the robots know, right? The robots know. So I was like, you tell me, like, what does this look like? So I'm going to actually start with my middle one, the luxury one. This is what Mike's article like highlights. Even again, he's not calling out particular watches, but I want you to kind of walk through this intellectual exercise with me. So let me say that you know someone and they want to build a 3-watch collection. Like that discussion came up. They want to build a 3-watch luxury collection. And we're going to define luxury as watches that you could get at retail for $12,000 or less. I did that to accommodate my Rolex choice. So otherwise I'd have done 10. But Santos, this is the watch I used on the cover of the thumbnail, right? The Santos de Cartier. I like the look of this watch. I used to own a Santos 100. I don't own a Santos anymore, but I still like the Santos, and I've still considered getting a Santos. The Rolex Submariner, the date version is the more popular one, so that's why I had to go up over $10,000. This is the current model, but again, just under 11,000 US dollars. Classic design, wears really well, well-sized, excellent bracelet. While I prefer the no-date version, I like the Submariner. I've always liked that. I liked the Submariner before I was into watch collecting. So again, but this is a watch that would come to your mind if you were if you were to ask the robots, give me a 3-watch luxury collection under $12,000 per watch. This watch being in there would surprise none of you, just like the Cartier, and just like the Speedmaster Moonwatch Professional. Not a personal favorite of mine, but dripping in history, extremely iconic design. A lot of people love the way this looks. So I want you to there's always a gut instinct on anything. If someone told you they're a watch collector and they own a Santos, a Sub, and a Speedmaster, you're going to think something. Now, I don't know what it is that you're going to think, but I'm going to speculate creativity isn't high on the list. That's what Mike was getting at in his article. That this sort of things, that this is what he felt was superficial collecting, that you're not actually really going in and looking at. And again, it's a hobby. It's a superficial hobby, as Jonathan said. You don't have to go. So it's okay to collect like this would be my argument. But it's fair enough to say, did you really think all that hard on it? Or did you just go did you just go on YouTube and look at top luxury watches and then you pick the 3 most common ones that you could possibly think of? So that's kind of where he was getting at. And that's the part I sympathize with, because I definitely could see that argument when I think about this. And I love one of these 3 watches, and I like a second one quite a bit. So like I could see these watches in my own collection. But that being said, I also, when collecting, think about the fact that it looks like I sure didn't spend a lot of time thinking about collecting when I put it together. That's kind of where that is. So that's where I wanted to open with, is sort of like that. This is, I think, the most stereotypical, right? The most stereotypical version of it. But let's see. Ben says, I always shock my watch friends that I meet in public when we start to discuss our collections. I'm sure I don't look like I'd be into watches or sort of knowledgeable about them. I don't know what a person who looks like they would be into watches like. I don't know. I guess I've been on, since you see me all the time, maybe you think I look like I'm in watches. I never really thought I looked like I'm in watches. I don't have like any other expensive accoutrements. Like most of the time when I go to work, I wear Dockers for slacks. I drive a Toyota. Like I don't, the pinball machines. Okay. But pinball's a weird hobby. So, but people don't see those. So yeah, I got into watches because I like how they work and I like how they look. And yeah, but normally, I'm a t-shirts and shorts sort of guy, but I know a lot of watch collectors are too. That's where it's like, you see sometimes people will discuss on Reddit and stuff. I want to go visit the AD to look at a Tudor. Like, what should I wear? Who cares? They're used to like ultra rich people walking in with boat shoes and some cotton t-shirt on. Like, it's not, don't overthink it, guys. Don't overthink it. It's your money. You're the one in command, not them. But anyway, just one of those interesting things. But Ben follows with, I have a sub from the 80s and I still want the Tudor Black Bay 58. That basically is a copy of the sub. Ristful says, same, even though my knowledge base is surface level. Don't ask me what reference numbers either. Reference numbers are the bane. I know my Rolex's reference number. I might be able to do like two others. And that's about it. Like every time I listen to podcasts on watches and they start talking Pateks, because the Patek numbers are short. A lot of people have memorized the Patek numbers. I don't know the Patek numbers. I can't even keep my Gondolo's number straight. I think it starts with a 5. But everything else, and if you can memorize Omega reference, like if you know this Moonwatch reference number, like, oh yeah, no, that's the 310 30 42 50 01002. Like, wow, more power to you. But I'm also not particularly impressed by people who memorize reference numbers. And the reason for that is, maybe I should be, because it's hard for me, but I think it's a good way to mask a lack of overall knowledge in watches, is if you're able to spool off numbers. It's a very easy way to, I almost classify it as faux intellectualism. Not necessarily, but hey, look, I know a bunch of numbers, so now you're going to think I'm an expert. But there's no depth. Like, numbers are just another way to say a name. So there's no real depth to that. Like, it doesn't mean anything other than numbers tend to blend in a lot of people's brains more. So that I say, oh yeah, no, I have a 16570, and Rolex, you're going to be like, oh yeah, okay, so that was the 2 generations past Rolex Explorer 2. But that doesn't tell you that I know the movement, that I know anything about the complication, the history of the watch. Doesn't tell you anything. All I did was I told you it's an Explorer 2 with a 41 millimeter size. That's all it said. And that doesn't even mean I know that it's 41 millimeter. That's my point with that. But anyway, just one of those things. Let's see. Patrick says, my Tudor feels safer to wear. Still a great choice. Ben continues saying, even though I have a large collection, I could be a superficial collector. I may get over it in about 10 years. Nerd. Yes, nerd. Yes, I am a nerd. That part is definitely true. Ristful says, I look like a watch collector. I think that's just, you've seen me too many times, is all that is. Ben's, though, echoing that the guys know nobody looks like a watch collector. I do not look like a watch collector. Quit saying that. M. Cart says, people mistake watch collector with watch enthusiast. The true collector goes for a particular style of watches. Enthusiasts just go as they are following the trends. Could be. Sometimes I use the word enthusiast more for me than collector, in the sense that my choices for what I own are driven more by what I want to wear rather than amassing something. Because I agree with you, a collection is... My problem is with a lot of watches, if I'm not wearing them, I start to feel like I shouldn't own them and I should let them go to someone who will wear them. And so I do have some tendencies that go more enthusiast than collector. But unlike your definition of enthusiast, I do think I have a lot of watches that I wear that they're not widely trendy. Like this is my most recent watch, the Go60s. I don't think the Go60s has ever been a trendy watch. Maybe when the first iteration came out in the 60s, and that's all the East Germans could buy. But so there's something else, there's something in between there, I think, but I'm not quite sure how to define it. Patrick also tends to call himself an enthusiast. No, for me, it's because I am more driven by wearing than collecting. I do have some watches that I basically don't wear that are just in my box to collect, but I'm not really big into amassing lots and lots of something if I'm not using it. Like I've had some stuff like that before, like baseball cards and stuff, but just not where I'm at this day and age. And Trap Vision, good morning to you as well. Hope things are going well. All right, we're continuing to discuss this idea of superficiality. And I used the luxury example, right? I used the go-to that everyone's going to think of, like, okay, Sub Santos Moonwatch, right? You didn't think. You did what people are going to assume you did what other people told you to do. And if that's how you want to be, that's totally fine. But it also might be you arrived at that decision independently, but people won't believe it unless you articulate it. Does that matter? No, but I think that's where, again, this article from Mike is getting at. Let me go into affordable, though, because it's not just a luxury thing. So let's say we were talking about we're going to stick with 3-watch collection ideas. Let's stay with another 3-watch collection, but each watch is under $1,000. Okay. Like a few years ago, I would not have done this one. I'd have done an SKX, right? Like, oh no, if you're a watch collector, you have to have an SKX. I could have I probably should have swapped this one and thrown a G-Shock in here because I own a G-Shock. And I think I can't be the only one who's actually seen someone tell someone else, you have to have a G-Shock in your collection. I've heard it before. But the SRPD line, it's basically the successor to the SKX. Again, at this stage, if you were to get an SKX, I would say most people would probably say you tried too hard for it to be superficial because you had to go out and get it used, and it was too easy to buy this one. But this is like the easy way to get that look. So you do that. Here's one you all have heard me talk about all the time, the Bambino. Well, we're going to blame YouTube for some stuff, right? I've blamed YouTube for years pushing the Bambino. I have nothing against the Bambino. I think it's an incredibly attractive dress watch. But it is definitely, I don't think Teddy Baldessar has done a single dress watch video that was a collection of stuff that didn't include a Bambino in it. Every single time. There are other affordable dress watches besides the Bambino. But so if I see someone wearing a Bambino, is my initial instinct that they actually put a lot of thought into it or that they just did what someone told them to do? See, it lives outside of the Rolex and Omega space. It lives in the affordable space. And here's this one is probably going to resonate with a lot of people. How many people's first Swiss-made watch was a Hamilton? I don't know. Like those of you in the chat, maybe mine was not, but it was one of my early mechanicals. Once I started getting into collecting, Hamilton was one of the first that I actually picked up. It wasn't this particular model, but again, the khaki field mechanical, it's just one of those things where people just sort of tell you should like it. And it's a good watch. I know plenty of people who watch this channel who have Hamilton khaki fields and like them. I've continued to look at them. I haven't bought any because after I owned a Marathon field watch, I realized I just don't wear field watches very much. But it's one of my favorite looks. In fact, I got the Marathon solely because almost the opposite. And this is another line you could say versus the superficial collector would be the contrarian collector who deliberately refuses to like popular things solely to be different. I liked the look of this watch and I bought the Marathon because it looked similar, but it wasn't the Hamilton. Now, a lot of that was driven by the fact I had already owned a Hamilton and I didn't want another Hamilton. But nonetheless, I did go to an awful lot of effort to find a dial that was basically a Hamilton, but wasn't Hamilton, which kind of was pointless in a way if that's what I wanted. But you see what I'm getting at is, again, if someone were to be like, I'm collecting watches, and they were like, they posted the SRPD 55, one of the Orient Bambinos, and a khaki field mechanical, you'd probably say, nice collection. But you'd also probably think that they haven't really branched out very much either. And so that notion of superficiality could definitely be in play. So again, just getting at where, Mike in his article here focused on luxury watches, expensive stuff. And maybe he felt that was more meaningful, but I think, the notion of collecting and encouraging people to not just buy what everyone else is buying. I think that was the spirit of what he was getting at. And I think that's an interesting story. And ultimately, the end back up on these things, like I like Black Bays. I've had a Black Bay. I'm still looking at other Black Bays. I totally get that. But it's the idea of not letting the algorithm tell you what you should like, but finding a way to explore other things and then arriving in maybe what you arrive at is what this stuff is. I mean, I've acknowledged I'm a pretty boring collector. I tend to favor staid looking watches, we'll say conservative or classical. But that just tends to be my instinctive preference. So I'm going to align with a lot of the really common stuff, because a lot of the really popular things that people talk about are not the weird avant-garde things, because avant-garde by its very nature is controversial. So let's see. I'm catching up with chat here. Ben 10 says, I see Seiko so much that I do not want to confirm and get one myself. I might be a covert Seiko hater. Ben actually raises an interesting point, because as I noted at the start of the video, I didn't see the article first. One of the podcasts I listened to was A BlogToWatch's weekly podcast. They brought this up and had a conversation, and it was Ariel on the show who said, they were talking about the type of collectors. And one of the things he brought up was very in line with Ben. For him, he has a reaction when he sees someone and all they have are Seikos. And it's not a positive reaction. It's a reaction of, you're too scared to branch out. And he thinks that most collectors would be happier if they branched out. And so it's a fair point. And I've had similar thoughts. I love watching state of the collection videos on YouTube. I just like seeing how different people have, sometimes they'll explain how they got to the collection. That's interesting. But just even seeing just the watches themselves, it lets you kind of figure out how their mind works. Like you start to see someone might just be totally into black dials. I see a lot of that on Reddit, where people will post the photo and they'll be like, here, I've got 5 watches and I want to fill the 6th slot. What would you recommend? And a lot of people, the top voted comments will be things like, something that isn't black. Maybe you could try for white, maybe blue. Maybe that's too far. Maybe try blue, sort of and again, these are just other, some people just love a particular colorway, and that's just the way it's going to be. But the Seiko thing is interesting, because Seiko has so many different looking watches that you can really explore a lot of different looks before you had to branch out of Seiko. I see it more with Rolex, and in the sense that one of my lights is starting to strobe here, so I'm going to get up and see if I can fix the bulb, because that is annoying. Okay, I cannot. So I'm turning off one of my studio lights, so it's only going to be one angled now. Sorry, I don't know the camera was picking up, but it was literally flashing. I think the it's an old fluorescent, so I'm going to have to replace it. So now you get the half light, half shadow look, and I apologize. So feel free to downvote for the terrible video quality. But the exploration of Rolex, the Oyster case is just, unless you get in like Cellini in the past, or now with like the 1908, that Oyster case, it's a samey look. That's why while I like the look, I could not be someone who just collected a bunch of Rolex, because the case designs are just too similar. But that's the me thing. But that was something Ariel brought up with Seiko. So that was anyway, Ben, you reminded me of that discussion. Patrick said, I saw a stranger wearing a Bell & Ross once. I knew that person liked watches. No one who doesn't like watches would spend $3,000 on a Bell & Ross. Yeah, Bell & Ross I've looked at several times. I can't. The square look, again, the Santos will work for me, but the Bell & Ross, I can't. And I've seen round Bell & Rosses, but I'm like, but it's Bell & Ross. Why would I get a round watch if it was Bell & Ross? Ben says, yeah, Teddy influenced me to get a Bambino. I never wore it. I was finessed by Teddy. Hey, Teddy's videos are real. I enjoy watching Teddy's videos, but You start to when he does a lot of the top or get X watches in this price point, you start to see the same ones are repeating constantly. He just has to, he's turning out the content, but the ones that get recommended don't vary all that much. And that's true for a lot of channels. Jonathan says, I've been at a stage of my collecting journey where I can't help but think entry-level watches are just bad products. But what I think to be good watches are just way too expensive. That is the space where I feel Tudor, like that's the line Tudor's trying to walk, right? That is a things that are sub $1,000 people aren't happy with anymore for whatever reason. They're tired of always having the same movements in them. They're tired of where the corners are always cut, like the bracelets are always garbage or whatever it is. But they also don't want to be like paying $8,000 for an Omega Moonwatch professional. So Tudor's in a spot where I just feel like there aren't a whole lot of other brands. The label, and I've mentioned I don't like this label, it's entry-level luxury, because it implies that you're like on a journey to eventually get to spending 5 figures on a watch. And a watch collecting or enthusiast journey doesn't require linear movement, much less progressively more and more expensive. So before I was a collector, I had my used Rolex Explorer 2. And then because I got new into collecting, actually I got a second Rolex, and then I got into collecting. And then I started to buy a lot more affordable watches. And I've bounced all over. So like last year, I got my Baltic bronze Aquascaphe watch. I still wear that watch. And then this watch obviously was a lot more expensive than that. But, used, it was less than a watch I bought earlier in the year, which was probably my second most expensive watch I've ever bought. So, it's I do sympathize, because you do see the quality kick up once you throw more money at it, and then the diminishing returns start to kick in as well. But I've known other people that work the other way, where they've had expensive watches and they just have a lot more fun in the more affordable end, because they don't lose as much sleep over whatever, and they're willing to do something quirky. I bring this up a lot when we talk about summer watches. The notion of a watch to be enjoyed in the summertime. We talked about them on this live stream quite a bit, and the price point rubs me the wrong way, because I'm like, that's a watch you're going to wear like two months out of the year, and probably not every single day. Are we really spending $7,000 on this thing? Are we really willing to spend over $700 on it? And there's a market for that. I don't think it's a big market, but it's not me. So that all comes into play. So let me go ahead and skip around a little bit. Trap says, Tudor has been the #1 suggested watch on my feed this week. It's like Rolex. It's a really nice product. Like the finishing is decent. The movement finishing is terrible, but that's why I'm a big fan of their closed case back watches. But like, I still remember the in-house one I had, and that the winding felt great. The bezel was crisp. The case polishing and brushing was good. Even the Tudor 1926 was really, really nice. But in that used an embossed movement, a modified third-party movement. But it is what it is, I guess. Violinist, welcome to the live stream. Honestly, I'm so sick of seeing Apple Watch. I'll take anything I see at this point. Yeah, if I see a basic Seiko SRPD, I'm freaking thrilled. I see so many smartwatches, and they're almost all Apple now. Where I work, almost everyone who wears a watch wears a smartwatch. And I have noticed there are a few people who wear Seikos, and I've never asked them about them, because again, there's a difference. Because initially when I see a watch on a person's wrist, I don't assume that they are a collector, and that's including a Seiko. What I actually assume is that they got it as a gift. That's just my default assumption. When I see someone with a watch that isn't a smartwatch, I assume it's a gift. So I saw someone who works for me who had I think it was a different watch, and it was right after Father's Day. So I really assumed that, and I think it was a Seiko, and I think he has another Seiko. So I may have to ask at some point. The only person I know where I work who collects watches is my boss, because he's got Oruses, and those told me enough. Because I could see someone getting Seiko as a gift, and Orus. Yeah, I could see that as a gift too, but that seems like a gift you get someone that you already know is into watches. So one of those things. But I'm always excited when I see anything that isn't a smartwatch as well. So I'm right there. I don't care. I don't do the, like, oh, hoity toity, you don't have a Ulysse Nardon. You're not a real, like, it's not it. Like, if you saw a micro brand on someone's wrist, you're going to know they're into watches. Like, no one goes out and just finds a Baltic. No one goes out and just finds Studio Underdog and buys it. It's like you're in already if you're doing that. Ben says, what I do like about being a watch collector is that you spend so much money that it forces me to invest more to make up for it. So I feel like I'm doing the right thing. That is interesting. I don't know if I've gotten, I guess I have actually gotten better about actively investing more. So like, once I got into collecting, I made sure like anything in savings was in high yield savings. And now I try and be more proactive about, okay, I need to move this into an index. Cause it's just sitting there, and I'm not, Dennis, you're not literally going to go out tomorrow and buy a Vacheron 222 in gold. Take that money and invest it instead. It's a smart play. So yeah, I'm gonna be there with you, Ben. I'm gonna say, you know what? Watch collecting has actually made me money. It probably has not, but at least it's made me more mindful of the money I have. Let's put it that way. Greetings, Tap. Hope things are going well for you. Greetings to Jason with Design Atelier. Hope things are good out in Aruba. All right, oh gosh, there's so many chat things. I'm gonna have to skip some more so that we will be able to end this on relative time. But I do see Jonathan has a chat item saying, Dennis, what are your impressions of the current state of the hobby? Is it a dying art? No, no, not really, not dying, not in the sense like, are watches going to become less and less popular? Probably yes. Well, I'm a coin flip on it, actually. So Ariel Adams with A BlogToWatch, I mentioned his stance on the Seiko collector earlier. He's brought up a lot about like we're in a golden age right now because there are all these parts manufacturers, especially in China, movement manufacturers, case manufacturers, all of that. And the micro brands are able to take advantage of them because those companies used to be producing a lot more casework for bigger brands. And as demand has declined, as people have turned to the Apple Watch and such, or no watch whatsoever, those businesses, those factories to stay afloat are now making deals with micro brands. But those factories will eventually, this is Ariel's argument, those factories will eventually not be able to make enough money to stay in business. They will go away, or the price will get so high that micro brands will no longer be able to just turn to them for a really cheap deal on casework because the volume's just not there. So collecting will always exist, in his opinion, will become much more exclusive, much more refined, and much more expensive because the affordable options that we have today will no longer be possible anymore because the economy of scale is not there. He makes a really good argument, and I think there's a reasonable chance that he's right. However, the thought that Apple Watch gets people comfortable with the notion of wearing something on their wrist, and then that makes them start to want to stand out from the pack and not walk around with what looks like most of the times a black screen on the wrist. I do think that we're actually in a better place for people to become watch collectors than we were 15 years ago. I think the early 2000s were like the dark time. I think when people started all having cell phones and the time was on the cell phone, I don't even mean smartphones, I mean flip phones, and the time was available there, that was the biggest blow to watches in general, much less watch collecting. Now, wearing the Apple Watch is getting people back to the idea that it's convenient to have the time on the wrist. Not everyone's going to do that jump. I have my dad's Seiko now. He gave it to me last year. I have it because he doesn't wear his watches anymore because he told me I just pull my phone out of my pocket to look at the time. Like, he doesn't wear an Apple Watch. He uses his phone like so many people do. So he just wasn't wearing them anymore. He knows I do this stuff, so he gave them to me. So that's there, but once again, people associating the wrist with telling time, that's what the Apple Watch does. I think some people think that the Apple Watch is like a big launching platform. Right? Some watch manufacturers argue that not really. Getting people into watches is going to take more work than just getting them to wear a computer on their wrist. However, the the idea of stuff still being on the wrist and that being a normal thing to look at, that's what the Apple Watch keeps in mind. Whereas, 50 years ago, people wore ties all the time. And like, we ain't ever getting back to that. Like, fashion got casual for a whole host of reasons. Things like the Apple Watch existing make it so that it's still socially seen as normal to have something like this on the wrist. So anyway, so I think Ariel's more right than the opposite. I do think that we're gonna like this is a golden age for micro brands. I don't think that's gonna last. I think things are gonna eventually be. It will not surprise me if we end up getting to a point where, other than the most large companies, will be our only options for watches under $1,000. But we're talking like a generation at least away, so it's nothing imminent. So dying art. Diminishing art, Jonathan, would be what I'd say. I think we're in a diminishing art. I don't see watches ever dying. I think it's too popular. It's too much of a status symbol, at the very least at the high end, for people. It's like neckties will never truly die, but they are diminished. There's just always a place. It's just a different place than we're at. Well, I think, and I do feel like, as Wristful Ignorance points out, a lot of what we experience right now is just part of this post-pandemic drop that makes it feels worse than it really is right now. And then now, especially with the tariffs and everything else going on, it's just we're in a contraction period anyway, and especially on the luxury side. So it feels more dire than I think it truly is. But that I may be wrong. It's just a guess. I only look like a watch collector, apparently. All right. I wanted to go ahead and show you I wanted to do the Ultra, though, because he didn't focus on this. Mike didn't in his article on A BlogToWatch, which again was linked in the video description. But here, let me give you this when we're talking about a superficial collection. I want to know what you think. So I told you an Ultra collector, 3-watch collection. And their 3 Ultra watches are the Patek 5711, 1A, if you want to be specific. The Royal Oak Jumbo, extra thin, and then their affordable beater, the prior gen Rolex Daytona 12-6500 LN in white. What would that 3-watch collection tell you? I don't think it's going to tell you that they're a high-end curator who poured a lot of thought into reflecting their personality. I think most people would say this collection is only about one thing: status. And it conveys that very well and tells you nothing about any taste whatsoever that they might have as a collector. So I could definitely see someone saying the 5711 coupled with the Royal Oak Jumbo, coupled with the Rolex Daytona, is a superficial collection. Like, you could ask Copilot or ChatGPT, I have $300,000 to spend on watches. Tell me what 3 I should buy. And that this would probably be the answer. Maybe be the answer. I don't know. The AI tools are getting better. It might give you multiple answers. But that, I think, is what Mike was getting at with this article. He just used watches that people could actually get. But if I gave you these 3 as someone's collection, all these comments aside about the elitism of the article and the judgment about what what he was trying to say and whether we should care or not, and all of it being fair, I really struggle that very many of you would see this as anything other than superficial and driven by trying to project rather than trying to collect or be enthused about anything. But so that's why I want to end it with this one, because I feel like this is the winner one to say. Like, I've really pushed it to the edge here with these 3 watches. And you totally probably have seen people online who have talked about have an episode of a podcast or a YouTube show or whatever, and these 3 watches were featured or referenced in the discussion. Or maybe you even seen collectors and they showed off these 3, especially if they were dealers and they might have access to them. So I don't know. Thoughts? Because it's tough for me to feel like that's a really curated collection that's telling you anything about anyone's personality. And that was what Mike was getting at. And I like the Daytona. I think it's a very attractive chronograph. I like the Royal Oak. Okay, it's like, kind of like back to my luxury ones when we were back here. Like, I really like the Submariner. I like the No Date more, but I'm really into the Submariner. I like the Cartier Santos. I could see owning another one in the future. I used to have one. Not a big fan of the Moonwatch personally, but I totally respect that it's very, very popular. And here, like if I was offered a Daytona attractive watch, it's not a watch I'm after, but I think it's attractive. I don't like the shape of the Nautilus. I actually like the shape of the Cubitus more, quite frankly. I just don't like that the Cubitus is such a lazy iteration of I judge it for its lack of creativity in its creation. But honestly, I think it's a more attractive watch. I just don't like the porthole look. It's never worked. And the Nautilus has never worked for me. For me, the Nautilus looks better the more complicated you make it also. And I tend to favor time and time plus date watches. But I actually think the Nautilus looks better the more interesting you make the dial. The other stuff is what it is. But anyway, my point being, I don't dislike all these watches, and I think many people don't. But if you saw someone with all three, I don't think you would think that they were really diving into researching and collecting, other than maybe checking the values. And again, some people collect like that. So I don't know. Patrick with Pocket Watch Time says, that's the most lame, predictable, lazy collection. I mean, I did my best, and this set of watches was very easy to compile. The hardest thing was finding a good photo of all of them, because all of the, other than the Royal Oak, the Nautilus and the Rolex Daytona that I'm using are discontinued. So you can't just go to their main websites anymore. So let's see. I'm sorry. Rispel says that collection sounds like a flipper kit, which Patrick agrees with. Ben10 says $127,000 for a Patek. I could never, because that same $127,000 in an ETF or even a J&J stock would give you roughly 200 plus quarterly on top of the 23% year-to-date return. Yes, there was an episode of the 1916 Company podcast with Arnold and Tim Mosso that talked a little bit about watches as an investment. And they brought up that about even taking the most hype watches, including, I believe they used the 5711, and showed that even though we've seen, in COVID, you had some very short-term, really high spikes. So if you happen to get it right at retail and then COVID hit and you held it for a year, okay. But otherwise, long-term performance, they looked at a lot of vintage stuff. And yeah, the index funds, they beat it. They almost always beat this stuff. And the index funds are such a safe bet. So, but again, I'm not an investment advisor, and nothing I'm saying on this YouTube channel is be taking investment advice. I'm also not a lawyer, and I'm not giving you any legal advice. There, the disclaimers have been applied. But that same analysis applies for me, Ben. The other analysis I would do is, okay, $127,000 for the Patek. What other watch could I get for $127,000 or less? And there are plenty that I like more. That's the thing that I run into with the Daytona. So I like this. I like the look of the Daytona. But this version is $35,000. I'll just get a Zenith if I care that much at this point. The Zenith Chronomaster Sport will give me this colorway. I'll get it at a discount. I'm going to get it probably for closer to $10K. And it's going to have the 5 hertz movement. I'm going to like the movement more. I'll actually be able to see the movement, unlike this watch, which if you care about that, and I like to see among chronographs. And wearability wise, what's the loss? The bracelet. The Rolex is going to have quite a bit better bracelet. I do have a Zenith. I do like it a lot. The bracelet is not a great bracelet. It's more the clasp than anything else. But again, there are other chronographs too that we could start considering at $35,000. There's a lot on the table that is very interesting. Rispel says, Dennis, your microphone is popping. Thank you. I'm sorry. I think it was because I think I have my settings on auto adjust volume, and I got loud. I got overly excited, and I wasn't watching my monitor. I actually have it fairly far away, but thank you for letting me know. I wasn't watching the light. Ben says, yeah, the Daytona craze, I don't understand. Maybe because I'm not a NASCAR fan. I just think for me, I just think it's a really attractive case shape. Why it used to not be popular though. So things changed over time. Thelonious says you could save $10,000 and get a two-tone Daytona. Yeah, I did again, because we were we were focusing on what like the ultra collector would do if Skynet told them what to buy. It has to be a Panda. It has to be the white dial. That's the more valuable one versus the black. So yeah, no, you could definitely scratch the Daytona itch in a more affordable way. In fact, it would probably suggest that you are a more creative collector if you didn't go for babies paint by numbers. I almost did a babies first and made a little graphic thing, but I'm too lazy to do that for the live stream. But just one of those things. Jason says, by the way, Zenith authorized dealer here. Let me know if you need a Chrono Sport. There is your plug for I have a Chronomaster original, which fits my wrist, I feel, better than the Chrono Sport. And Restful Ignorance says, 35,000, rather get a precious metal Glashütte original. Yeah. Well, I actually have something I need to go and do. So we've made it. We made it to the end of the stream. You got to see my terrible superficial collection examples, and we got to talk about what is superficiality, essentially the entire hobby. Is it fair to judge people's collections? I think the answer is maybe not so much the collection, but the method of collecting, sure. But people have to have their freedom to do what they want to do. And in some ways, it's just better to have people collecting than really caring about how they do it. But as collectors and enthusiasts, it's fun just to have a conversation about the different ways people approach things. So anyway, I will plan to be back next week with another live stream. Do not know what the topic will be. Hopefully by then I will have either seen if I can fix this light bulb, or I will order some new LED lights to go into my giant lights. I've had these for a while now, so I guess I should have expected that eventually one of them would start to fail. But appreciate all of you tuning in live. If you didn't and you're watching the recording, go ahead and leave your comments about watch collecting below. I will go back and read those. Thanks for spending some time with me. I appreciate it, and I hope you all have a really good weekend. Take care, everybody.